He was 71 when the final shadows of his life began to settle, and the world kept asking the same question he never truly answered. Jack Tatum, the man they called the Assassin, spent decades living inside a storm of fear, glory, and controversy. He was a symbol of the old NFL, a time when violence was celebrated and remorse was optional. Yet behind the ferocity that defined him, there was one moment that followed him all the way to the end. One impact, one collision. One life changed forever. Long before highlight reels turned brutality into entertainment, his name became a warning whispered across locker rooms. Wide receivers feared the sound of footsteps behind them. Running backs learned to brace whenever he appeared in the corner of their vision. Coaches told rookies that if they wanted to survive, they must always know where number 32 stood. He hit harder than anyone of his era, and some said harder than anyone before or after. But the truth that hovered over his career was not about strength. It was about consequence. The collision with Stingley became more than a football play. It became a moral question that followed Tatum for the rest of his life. A question about intent, pride, regret, and whether a man built from steel could ever allow himself to crack. Tonight we uncover the 5 hidden truths behind his violent legacy. The truths he carried, denied, ignored, or embraced. The truths that shaped his reputation as the assassin and left the world wondering one final thing. Did Jack Tatum ever feel remorse? Long before he became a symbol of fear, Jack Tatum was a young athlete searching for purpose. He grew up in a world that rewarded toughness and punished hesitation, a world where the only way out was to hit harder, run faster, and refuse to break. That upbringing shaped the man who would eventually change the way the league viewed safety, aggression, and responsibility. When he stepped onto a football field, he understood one truth. Violence was not a byproduct of the game. It was the game. At Ohio State, he transformed from a promising running back into a defensive force who altered the rhythm of every play he touched. Coaches saw a rare combination of instincts and fearlessness. He never chased contact. He let contact come to him, then delivered it with surgical precision. Fans admired him. Opponents respected him. Most feared him. His reputation only grew when he joined the Oakland Raiders, a franchise built around defiance and intimidation. Under the harsh lights of the 70s, with the Raiders known for living on the edge of legality, Tatum found the perfect stage. The era itself was unforgiving. Rules were lenient. Equipment was primitive, and the culture celebrated brutality as a badge of honor. Defensive backs learned to survive by imposing their will. Receivers ran routes knowing a single mistake could end their night. Stadiums thundered for big hits that shook helmets and rattled bones. Tatum thrived in this world. He mastered timing. He mastered angles. Most importantly, he mastered the ability to make opponents question their courage before the ball was even snapped. His coaches did not ask him to soften. They asked him to punish. They praised him for turning games with one collision. They trusted him to create fear that stretched far beyond the box score. To the Raiders, fear was a strategy, and no one embodied that strategy more completely than number 32. Yet behind the aura of controlled violence, another narrative slowly formed. Tatum's hits were not just powerful. They were transformative. They changed drives, changed seasons, and eventually changed lives. Fans began debating whether he represented the spirit of football or the danger hidden at its core. Commentators admired his skill, yet questioned the cost. The league took notice, and whispers about rule changes began long before his most infamous collision. As seasons passed, his image grew heavier. He was no longer just a defender. He became a symbol of the sport's darkest beauty. He played without apology. He carried himself with pride, but the world around him shifted. Conversations about player safety grew louder. Questions about intent became sharper. And the collision with Stingley moved the debate from theory to reality. Before that moment defined him, he had already built a legacy of dominance. After that moment, his legacy would never again belong solely to him. George Atkinson was more than a teammate. He was a mirror that reflected everything chaotic, ruthless, and unpredictable about the Raiders of the 70s. As one of the most aggressive defensive backs of the era, Atkinson shared the same turf, the same philosophy, and the same unwavering commitment to intimidation that fueled Jack Tatum. Together they formed a defensive duo that terrified offenses across the league. They were feared as individuals, but when they stood side by side, they became something even stronger. They became the embodiment of Oakland's defiant identity. Yet beneath the surface of that partnership lived tension, rivalry, and a fight for dominance that defined their relationship. The source of their friction did not come from a single moment. It came from something far deeper. Both men wanted the same role. Both wanted to be the tone setter, the enforcer, the one who dictated the emotional temperature of a game. In a defense packed with personalities that competition carried real weight, Atkinson often felt overshadowed, especially as Tatum's hits drew headlines and shaped the way the media viewed the Raiders' brutality. Tatum, on the other hand, believed he earned that attention through precision and discipline. He did not consider himself a renegade. He saw himself as a craftsman. This difference in self-identity pushed the two men apart. Their rivalry simmered beneath the celebrations, team meetings, and long flights home. It was a silent contest. The moment that defined their tension arrived during a brutal divisional game in the mid-70s. It was a night when tempers flared, penalties piled up, and every snap carried the promise of violence. Midway through the third quarter, a receiver cut across the field, unaware that two of the league's hardest hitters were closing in. Atkinson launched first, striking high. Tatum followed a split second later, delivering a hit that echoed through the stadium. The receiver collapsed, motionless. Flags flew. Players shouted. Coaches demanded explanations. When the dust settled, Atkinson felt Tatum had stolen the impact that was meant to belong to him. Tatum believed he simply finished the play. That moment widened the gap between them. Teammates remembered the tension on the sideline, a cold silence that said more than words ever could. It was the night their partnership became a competition carved into memory. Through the years, the rivalry lived quietly but relentlessly. Atkinson bristled at interviews praising Tatum as the face of Raiders' brutality. Tatum ignored the noise, convinced that greatness spoke for itself. They celebrated wins, lifted trophies, and built a legacy together, yet neither man ever fully trusted the other. Their connection was forged through violence, but fractured by pride. The assassin and the hit. Man, two names feared across the league, secretly feared only one thing: each other's shadow. The cold truth is that their rivalry never truly ended. It did not fade after retirement. It did not soften with age. It simply settled into history as a quiet battle for identity inside one of the most intimidating defenses the game has ever seen. Tatum never forgot it, and Atkinson never forgave it. Mel Blount was everything the league wanted from a cornerback in the 70s. He was tall, powerful, fast, and almost impossible to shake in man coverage. His presence alone disrupted timing. His hands redirected routes. His confidence unsettled even the most polished receivers. Blount was the physical prototype for an era built on confrontation. But to Jack Tatum, he was much more than that. He was the standard he refused to fall behind. Blount played for the Steelers, the Raiders' fiercest rival, and every encounter between the two teams felt like a collision between philosophies. Pittsburgh believed in order and execution. Oakland thrived on chaos and intimidation. Blount stood at the center of Pittsburgh's identity, and Tatum could not ignore him. The tension between the two men did not grow from personal attacks or sideline exchanges. It grew from comparison. Analysts constantly measured them against each other. Who hit harder? Who frightened receivers more? Who shaped the game's defensive culture? Blount dominated through suffocating coverage and violent hands. Tatum dominated through unyielding force and precision tackling. They played different positions, but the conversation always circled back to one question: who defined fear in the NFL? Tatum hated that question because it implied that fear had competition. To him, fear was earned, not debated. Blount represented the only challenge to that throne. The rivalry reached its peak during a brutal playoff game in Pittsburgh. The air was icy breath, visible pads cracking louder under the cold. Both teams understood that this matchup would decide more than a postseason run. It would define an era. Late in the second quarter, a receiver stretched across the middle on a deep dig route. He caught the ball and turned upfield, running directly into Blount. The contact was devastating. The crowd erupted. Moments later, another receiver attempted the same route from the opposite hash. This time, Tatum closed the distance. His hit was colder, louder, and final. The stadium fell silent before roaring again, split between shock and awe. The two plays placed side by side created an unmistakable message. Blount had delivered a statement. Tatum had answered it. Their rivalry did not need words. It needed moments. Their competition shaped the way both men were remembered. When the league introduced the Mel Blount rule restricting contact beyond 5 yards to protect receivers, it was a tribute to his dominance. But to Tatum, it was a reminder that Blount had changed the game in a way he never could. The assassin had created fear. Blount had created reform. They were both forces of nature, yet they left different marks on the league's rulebook. That contrast lingered in Tatum's mind for years. The cold truth is that Tatum never accepted sharing the title of the league's most feared defender. He believed fear was not something divided. It was something absolute. And as long as Mel Blount existed, that title had two faces. Tatum carried that resentment quietly, but it never disappeared. It shaped how he played, how he responded, and how he defended his identity until his final days. John Madden was more than a coach. He was a storm of energy, vision, and relentless command who turned chaos into championships. Players admired his passion. Fans loved his charisma. The league respected his mind. Madden understood football at a deeper level than most men of his era. Yet, for all his brilliance, there was one player he could never fully shape: Jack Tatum. The relationship between them was not built on hatred, but on friction, frustration, and a constant struggle for authority inside a locker room that lived by its own rules. The tension began with philosophy. Madden valued aggression, but he also believed in structure. He expected discipline from his players, especially those entrusted with shaping the tone of the defense. Tatum believed in destruction. He believed the game demanded violence, and he delivered it without hesitation. The two men never openly argued, but their approaches collided whenever Madden attempted to soften the team's edges. Tatum felt those attempts restrained him. Madden felt Tatum threatened the stability he tried to uphold. The result was a cold but powerful rift. Madden respected Tatum's talent, yet feared the consequences of unleashing him without limits. Tatum respected Madden's success, yet resisted any effort to control his identity. The defining clash occurred during a crucial regular season game late in the 70s. The Raiders were fighting for playoff position. Emotions were high. The opposing offense began targeting shorter routes, hoping to exploit gaps in the secondary. Madden repeatedly instructed Tatum to adjust his depth and play conservatively to protect the middle field. Tatum listened, but he did not obey. On a decisive third down, he read the play, abandoned the conservative cushion, and launched into a receiver with a hit that stopped time. The stadium erupted in a mix of cheers and stunned silence. The receiver stayed on the ground. The flags stayed in the officials' pockets. Tatum walked back to the sideline without celebration. Madden did not greet him. He stared, frustrated and impressed at the same time. The defense was saved. The game was won. But the message was clear. Tatum played by instinct, not instruction. From that moment on, Madden realized he could coach around Tatum, but he could never control him. The assassin operated in a world beyond schemes and assignments. He lived in the emotional landscape of the game where hits changed momentum and fear shaped destiny. Madden depended on him, but the dependence carried weight. Every time Tatum launched into an opponent, Madden worried about penalties, suspensions, and long-term consequences. Tatum saw only the play in front of him. Their connection became a silent argument. One man wanted order. The other thrived in disorder. The cold truth is that Madden never forgave the fact that his greatest defensive weapon refused to be molded. And Tatum never forgot that his coach doubted him, even as he trusted him. It was a relationship built on victories fractured by philosophy and remembered as one of the quiet battles that shaped the Raiders' identity. The National Football League was never a single enemy. It was a system. It was a machine built on spectacle profit and the myth of controlled violence. For most players of the 70s, the league was an authority to respect or avoid. For Jack Tatum, it became something far more complicated. The NFL needed him. It needed the fear he created. It needed the highlights of collisions that shook stadiums, the bone-chilling moments that drew millions to their televisions every Sunday. Yet at the same time, the league feared him. It feared the consequences of what he represented. And that duality shaped one of the most enduring tensions of Tatum's life. The conflict began when his hits started defining conversations about player safety. The league publicly insisted it valued toughness. Privately, executives worried about lawsuits, medical reports, and parents steering their children away from the sport. Every time Tatum delivered a devastating collision, the NFL gained attention. But every time a player stayed on the ground too long, the NFL gained scrutiny. Tatum felt the spotlight. He resented the hypocrisy. The league celebrated him when the cameras rolled, then distanced itself when controversies surfaced. He believed the NFL wanted his violence without accepting the responsibility attached to it. The breaking point arrived after the collision with Stingley. It was supposed to be just another preseason game. No playoff stakes, no championship pressure. Yet one moment transformed the sport forever. Stingley never walked again. Fans mourned, players reflected, reporters demanded answers. The league panicked. While Tatum insisted the hit was legal, officials and executives scrambled to manage public outrage. They offered sympathy to Stingley's family. They launched new safety discussions. They wrote statements emphasizing compassion. But they never reached out to protect Tatum's side of the story. They silently allowed him to become the face of the tragedy. He felt abandoned. Not because he expected praise, but because he expected fairness. He believed he had followed the rules they created. He believed he had done exactly what the league trained defenders to do. Yet, in the aftermath, the league chose distance. They needed a symbol for reform, and Tatum became that symbol. His name became part of debates in boardrooms and medical committees. Every new rule limiting contact felt like a rebuke aimed at him. Every conversation about safety felt like a shadow following his legacy. The cold truth is that Tatum never forgave the league for turning him into a warning instead of a champion. And the league never fully forgave him for forcing the world to see the cost of the violence it once celebrated. Their conflict was not personal. It was structural. A system built on power collided with a man built on impact. Neither side ever admitted fault, and neither side ever found peace. Stingley was not an enemy. He was not a rival. He was a promising young receiver whose best years were supposed to be ahead of him. Drafted by the Patriots with the hope of becoming a franchise cornerstone, Stingley carried elegance in his roots and courage in his cuts. He was the kind of player who attacked the middle of the field with both intelligence and instinct. To fans, he was ascending. To teammates, he was fearless. To Jack Tatum, he was simply the next man crossing his zone. They had no history, no bad blood, no words exchanged. Yet their lives would become bound together by one moment that neither man ever escaped. The tension between them was not born from personality. It was born from circumstance. On that August night in the late 70s, both men entered a preseason game carrying expectations. Stingley wanted to prove he belonged among the league's elite. Tatum wanted to sharpen his timing before the real battles began. The Patriots designed their offense to test the Raiders' secondary. Short routes, quick passes, high traffic areas across the middle, plays built for fast rhythm, plays built for danger. Each snap increased the likelihood that Tatum and Stingley would meet at full speed. Neither man knew the weight that moment would carry. It was a collision shaped not by emotion, but by inevitability. The play itself is stamped forever in NFL history. Stingley sprinted up the right hash, planted his foot, and angled toward the center of the field to catch a routine pass. Tatum broke on the route with perfect timing. The ball drifted slightly high. Stingley stretched upward. Tatum launched forward. The impact was instant. Helmet to chest, bone to force. The crowd gasped before the sound even registered. Stingley collapsed and did not move again. Silence replaced the stadium noise. Players from both teams froze. Trainers rushed the field. Tatum stood nearby, motionless, unsure whether he had witnessed a bad landing or something far worse. When Stingley was taken away on a stretcher, the shock traveled far beyond the field. It carried into living rooms across America. It carried into league offices. It carried into the story of Jack Tatum's life. From that moment forward, Stingley's name became inseparable from Tatum's. Reporters demanded remorse. Fans demanded explanation. Critics demanded punishment. But Tatum insisted the hit was legal. He insisted he had done his job the way he had always been taught. To him, apologizing meant admitting intent, and intent was the one thing he refused to accept. Stingley never walked again. His career ended that night. His life changed forever. Tatum's life changed too, but in a different way. Every interview, every documentary, every headline. The same question followed him. Did he feel regret? Did he feel responsibility? Did he feel anything at all? The cold truth is that the world never got the answer it wanted. Tatum protected his identity the same way he once protected the deep middle. Stingley carried the physical cost. Tatum carried the moral one. And long after both men were gone, the collision remained echoing through every discussion about the price of violence in football. Tom Foley never made headlines the way stars did. He was not the face of the Raiders' defense, nor was he a player fans associated with fear or controversy. But Foley saw something others did not. He saw the moments when Jack Tatum stopped performing for the cameras and returned to being a man carrying weight he refused to name. Foley was a quiet presence in the locker room, a stabilizer among chaos. He respected Tatum's power, but he also recognized the emotional armor that never cracked. Their relationship became a rare window into the humanity hidden behind the assassin. The tension between them surfaced not through conflict, but through contradiction. Foley believed football needed accountability. Tatum believed football needed honesty. After the collision with Stingley, Foley watched as teammates avoided the subject. Coaches spoke carefully, and reporters circled like hawks. Tatum maintained his public stance, insisting the hit was part of the game. But Foley noticed the silence in between. The long minutes Tatum spent at his locker staring at the ground. The nights he left the facility without speaking. The way his intensity sharpened in practice as though he was fighting something no defender could tackle. The moment that defined their connection happened late in the season. Foley found Tatum alone in the training room long after practice had ended. No reporters, no teammates, just the hum of fluorescent lights. Tatum sat with his helmet beside him, turning it slowly as if studying a weapon. Foley asked if he was all right. Tatum did not answer. He simply nodded once and left the room. It was the closest he ever came to admitting the weight he carried. The cold truth is that Foley understood what the world never did. Tatum felt the collision deeply. He just refused to let the world see it. Jack Tatum lived inside a world built on force. Every decision he made on the field was shaped by angles, speed timing, and the knowledge that one moment could swing a game. He built his identity on the idea that survival required impact. He believed a defender's legacy was measured not by interceptions, but by how often offenses changed their plays to avoid him. For years, that belief guided his rise. It shaped his reputation. It fueled his confidence. But as time passed, the collisions that once defined him began to form a deeper question about the price of his style. It was a question he never answered publicly, yet one that hovered over the final decades of his life. The rivalries with George Atkinson and Mel Blount pushed him to prove his edge. They forced him to sharpen his craft and defend his place at the top of a brutal hierarchy. His friction with John Madden revealed the gap between instinct and structure, a gap he never cared to close. And his conflict with the NFL exposed a truth he spent his entire career resisting. The league that celebrated destruction was the same league that feared the man who embodied it too completely. These tensions became the pillars of his story, but none of them carried the emotional weight of the collision with Darryl Stingley. That moment transformed everything. It changed how coaches viewed defensive backs. It changed how parents viewed the sport. It changed how the league crafted its rulebook. And it changed the way Tatum saw himself, even if he never admitted it. Before that night, he had been a symbol of intimidation. After that night, he became a symbol of consequence. The transformation was swift. One play reshaped the conversation around violence in a way statistics never could. Tatum spent the rest of his life balancing two identities: the fearless defender who played without hesitation, and the man forced to carry the public burden of a tragedy he insisted he never intended. The world tried to place him into neat categories. Some called him a villain. Some called him a victim of circumstances. Some called him a necessary figure in an era where players played hard, accepted the risks, and moved forward without apology. But Tatum resisted every label. He refused to let outsiders define his career through a single moment. He pointed to years of disciplined film study and precise execution. He spoke about the respect he earned from opponents. He mentioned moments when his hits turned games, lifted his team, or set emotional tones that statistics could never measure. To him, the collision with Stingley was part of the game's nature, not a moral failing, not a personal flaw, just football. Yet, beneath his confidence remained the silence his teammates never forgot. Tom Foley recognized it. Trainers saw it. Even rivals noticed the quietness that followed him after that night. The intensity still existed, but it came with something else. A weight carried in small movements, long pauses, and the look in his eyes when reporters asked questions designed to provoke guilt. Tatum never admitted remorse, but he never denied the weight either. He lived with it in a way that made the absence of confession feel even louder. As the league evolved, his legacy evolved with it. Rule changes designed to protect receivers reflected both his era and his impact. Every adjustment to reduce head contact referenced the culture he once thrived in. Broadcasters invoked his name whenever a violent collision shook a stadium. His image became both a warning and a tribute depending on who told the story. Young defensive backs admired his fearlessness. Older fans debated the morality of his style. Analysts argued about whether he represented the best or worst of football's past. But no matter the perspective, one truth remained. His influence was impossible to separate from the sport's transformation. When Jack Tatum passed away at age 71, the conversation resurfaced. Fans remembered his ferocity. Former teammates remembered his discipline. Critics remembered the tragedy tied to his name. And throughout all of it, the same unresolved question hung in the air. Did he ever feel remorse? No interview answered it. No book clarified it. No documentary solved it. The mystery became part of his legacy, shaping the way he was remembered long after he was gone. The cold truth is that Tatum's life cannot be summarized by one hit or one moment. His legacy was forged through rivalries shaped by a coach he could not obey, challenged by a league that did not know how to contain him, and haunted by a collision that forever altered the history of the sport. He lived in the space between admiration and condemnation, between pride and pain, between the power he unleashed and the consequences he never escaped. And in that conflicted space, he became something rare, a reminder that football is not simply a game of heroes and villains. It is a game built on choices, impact, and the fragile line between glory and regret. Jack Tatum walked that line his entire life, leaving behind a legacy that forces the world to confront one question. What does it truly mean to hit without fear in a sport that cannot survive without it? Jack Tatum's story forces every fan to confront a truth that does not fade with time. The game we love is built on courage, speed, and impact, yet it also carries a shadow that stretches far beyond highlight reels. His life reminds us that every collision has two sides. One lives in applause, the other lives in memory. And when the pads come off and the stadium lights fall quiet, only the man inside the uniform knows the full weight of what he carried. What do you think defined Jack Tatum more? His fearlessness or the consequences that followed him long after the final whistle? Was he a product of his era? Or did he push the sport to confront a reality it tried to ignore? And among all the hidden truths we uncovered, which one challenged your perspective the most? The rivalry that shaped him, the coach who struggled to contain him, the league that feared his power, or the collision that changed the game forever? Your voice matters here. This channel exists to explore the stories the world thought it already understood, only to discover the darker layers beneath them. If you want more legends from football's golden age, more untold conflicts, more deep dives into the moments that shaped the sport, then make sure to stay with us. If you found meaning or insight in this journey through Jack Tatum's legacy, subscribe to NFL Hidden Truths. It helps us bring these complex, overlooked stories back to life and keep the conversation alive. Because in a sport built on impact, the hidden truths are what linger the longest.